Hey, it's Wednesday, my dudes. Let's talk about the liver. The liver. Okay, so the liver, you remember when we drew our stomach, we drew the liver as kind of being this guy that kind of surrounded the stomach, like in this area right here. So it kind of comes in front of the stomach a little bit, definitely goes behind it and all along the sides and everything. The liver isn't just one part. The liver has lots of lobes, and each lobe is just another part of the liver, and a lobe is just like oh boy, how do you describe it? Kind of like sections of an orange, maybe. Yeah. Why don't we say that? And so, what happens is blood comes into the liver. Blood comes into the liver, and the liver does lots of different things to it. It changes the chemistry of the blood that comes in, and the blood that comes out has different amounts of certain things in it. And so it's really, really, really important to good, healthy blood getting around your body. Okay, so let's talk about the blood that comes in, because interestingly, there's two different blood sources to the liver. Almost every organ in the body has an artery that comes into the organ. And that artery brings with it blood that is really rich in nutrients and really rich in O2. And then the blood that comes out of it is deoxygenated or low oxygen blood. And then that goes to the heart. The liver almost follows this, but it's just not, it's a little bit different. Because the liver changes the chemistry of your blood, it needs to be kind of a direct, not source, what's the word I'm looking for? A direct depository? That when you eat, your nutrient-rich blood needs to get right to this liver. And so what you have is what's called a hepatic artery. Hepatic refers to the liver. That hepatic artery brings oxygen-rich blood to the liver. And then there is a vein that comes off of the digestive system, and before it heads back to the heart, since it's coming off of the digestive system, it's full of nutrients. There is a vein called the hepatic portal vein, and this vein brings nutrient-rich blood. So there's an artery that goes to the digestive system, branches off, absorbs all kinds of nutrients, it loses its oxygen, and this blood is really rich in nutrients, and that comes to the liver. Then the liver does what it does, and the hepatic vein is the conduit of blood out of the liver. That blood is now low oxygen, and its composition has changed. There's different kinds of molecules and chemicals in there. Because the liver, and let me change color here, the liver does a few different things to your blood. First of all, it stores and releases nutrients. Really important nutrients too, like, for example, glycogen and cholesterol. Let's see here. It detoxifies substances that are ingested. In fact, when companies make drugs, one of the first things they have to do is see what happens after you ingest that drug. And I'm talking about like aspirin kind of drugs here, because you ingest that aspirin, and the hepatic portal vein brings that digested aspirin now straight to the liver. And one of the first things the liver does is it tries to get rid of as much of that as possible, because it's a foreign substance. And so the liver is actually really efficient at getting rid of some of those things. It also produces a lot of proteins. that float in the plasma of the blood. And plasma is the liquid part of the blood. And by liquid, I mean it's the part of the blood that's not the red blood cells and it's not the white blood cells. It's the actual liquid that all those cells are floating in. And the liver also breaks down older red blood cells. All right, so here's how all of that works together. By all of that, I mean, how do your liver cells work with the blood that's coming in to get what it needs? So let's imagine a tube coming into the liver here. This is going to be our portal, or hepatic portal vein. I'm just going to label that HPV, which is also the abbreviation for human papillomavirus, which are genital warts, but this is short for the hepatic portal vein. So remember that the hepatic portal vein, let's come back over here, the hepatic portal vein is what's bringing lots of nutrients into the liver. So this blood is carrying a lot of nutrients, okay? And then the hepatic artery is going to bring, so we'll label this the hepatic artery, lots of oxygen in, okay? All right. Now these are going to join together and into a smaller and smaller and smaller tube, and this tube is called a sinusoid. A sinusoid. Now, as far as body terms, like a sinus means like a space. The sinuses that you have, like behind your nose, are a space or a cavity where mucus gets produced and things like that. So a sinusoid is like a capillary. It's very, very thin. Now this is a capillary. A capillary has a very thin wall and blood can just kind of travel through it. And it has tiny, tiny, tiny little pores where things can, cross the membrane and things like that. This is not a sinusoid. A sinusoid has big spaces in the walls of the membrane. Okay, so I want you to imagine a sinusoid is a hose with large holes drilled into it. So here's our sinusoid, and we have these big gaping holes in it, and in these big gaping, and the reason for these big gaping holes is so that not just little molecules like oxygen can pass through, but so that whole proteins can cross in and out. Remember, proteins are these giant molecules. And so if your liver needs to add proteins to put into the plasma part of the blood, like this is where it's got to do that. Okay, so we've got these sinusoids right here. And lining the sinusoid are all of these cells. There's all of these cells that fill in all of this space right here. The dot is the nucleus. So, oops, there's not two nuclei there, just one. I'll make that a big guy. Okay. All right, so we've got all of these cells. We'll go into more detail about what these cells do a little bit later. Since they are liver cells, we have a very general name for them. We're just going to call them hepatocytes. Cyte means cell, hepato means liver, so these are literally just liver cells. Okay. So let's see here. So there's all kinds of these sinusoids. And each one of these sinusoids is connected to one branch of the hepatic portal vein and one branch of the hepatic artery. So these things just branch smaller and smaller and smaller, and we get these sinusoids, and these sinusoids are just like lined with these hepatocytes that do all of this work. These hepatocytes are storing and releasing nutrients. They're detoxifying the blood that's coming in. They're producing proteins and dumping them into that plasma. And some of these are even breaking down old red blood cells. And then eventually all of these sinusoids end up in a larger tube. So there's even more sinusoids coming in and in and in and in. And then there's other tubes that kind of join together until eventually we end up with the hepatic vein. And this blood is going to go back to the heart. All right. So let's just talk about a couple of these things right here. We are going to talk about, what color am I on? We're going to talk about how this stores and releases nutrients and how the liver produces proteins, and then that'll be it for the notes today. Okay, nutrient number 1. Let's talk about carbohydrates. Okay. When you have excess glucose in your blood, the liver stores it as glycogen. You got to think way back at the start of the school year. You were supposed to notice that that's like a really branched structure made of a whole bunch of glucoses. And then think back to when we talked about insulin. When blood glucose levels are low, when it's low, then the glucagon will be released from the pancreas, and it will break glycogen down into glucose. So that glycogen will be released. And then conversely, when the blood glucose is too high, it's stored as glycogen. So all of this is regulated by those two hormones that we already know, which are insulin and glucagon. Okay, number 2 is proteins. Let's talk about proteins. So your body can't store amino acids. And if you can't store them, that means it's got to break them down. Now, let's remember that the structure of an amino acid is, we have an NH2 connected to a C, and then there's this variable R group, and we have C double bond OOH. So the problem with proteins is this guy right here. Because this particular group, which is called an amine group, is toxic. Potentially toxic. And so the liver is responsible for breaking this down into something that is not going to be very toxic to you. So what happens is that your liver turns it into another molecule called urea. And urea travels to the kidneys and is excreted in your urine. Okay? Your liver can also produce non-essential amino acids. Remember, essential nutrients are the things that your body can't produce. So your liver can produce some of these things. Okay? And finally, what's our last group? That is right, the lipids. Okay, so your lipids take extra carbs and proteins and turns them into fatty acids and triglycerides. Now, these fatty acids and triglycerides, your body can't transport them in blood, so they get transported in a kind of lipid plus protein structure called a lipoprotein. So that is some lipids plus some proteins together. And there are two kinds of them. There is LDL and HDL. And this stands for, pointer on, low density lipoprotein and high density lipoprotein. Okay, so how are these used? The low density lipoprotein takes cholesterol to cells. And high density lipoprotein takes the extra cholesterol back to the liver. All right. Now, because the LDL is going to your cells, it's not going back to the liver to be gotten rid of. LDL is considered to be bad, and so that's the bad cholesterol that doctors say you don't want floating around in your blood, because it's excess stuff that is not going back to your liver to be stored, but it's being taken somewhere else. Any extra cholesterol is gotten rid of in the liver, so that your body can get rid of it. All right, now for our last little bit of notes today, let's talk about those proteins that are produced inside of your liver. And these proteins are specifically made to change the chemical makeup of your blood. All right, so let's go over just a couple of these here. So let's talk about these proteins that are produced in your liver. So first of all, your hepatocytes in your liver have huge arrays of endoplasmic reticulum, specifically rough endoplasmic reticulum. And remember that the rough part of the rough ER is the ribosomes that make proteins. Protein 1 is called albumin. And albumin helps to maintain osmotic pressure in your blood. And that has to do with making your blood able to maintain certain amounts of water coming in or out of your blood. Because remember, if you have a low concentration of water in one place, it wants to go to a different place. Or let me rephrase that. If you have a high concentration of water, it wants to go to a different place, and your body needs to maintain a certain level of water in your blood. And albumin is the protein that helps to regulate that concentration. All right. There are globulins. Okay. Globulins help in the immune system. And they can transport materials around your blood. And finally, the last one, these are fibrinogens. Fibrinogens are involved in the clotting process. So when your blood gets clotted, when your blood forms a clot, what happens is a lot of fibrinogens that are floating around in your blood form this insoluble kind of web, doesn't dissolve. Albumin makes up about 60% of the proteins in your blood, globulins about 35%, and 4% of those are fibrinogens. Then less than 1% are some other things. But albumin is this really big one. This is maintained. This is made in the liver for sure. All right, that's it for today. More liver tomorrow. Let's talk about how your liver breaks down red blood cells and what jaundice is.